And welcome to this afternoon's webinar. We are one away from our final webinar of the year. And tonight we'll be focusing on maximising the impact of teaching assistants. And we're very lucky to have both Luke and Michelle here this evening to share some of their work at Emmaus Christian School, and also my colleague Tanya Vaughan. Pauline Ho is here in the chat box, so she will be responding to your comments, and I'll jump in there shortly too. We are looking at teaching assistants broadly, but we know that you've coming from a lot of different systems and different school settings. So teaching assistants, also known as classroom support staff, teaching assistants, assistant teachers, SLSOs, integration aids, teaching aids, and slightly different roles in slightly different systems as well. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we are joining you from today. For our team in Melbourne, we're joining from the Wurundjeri and Boonwurrung lands, the Kulin Nation, and also our colleagues in Canberra, Luke and Michelle, joining from Ngunnawal land. So we pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. Tonight's webinar, we will cover a little bit of the research evidence on teaching assistants and their role in schools. We're going to hear from Luke and Michelle about the whole school strategy and the use of TAs, and really looking at maximising impact and the change process that they've been through in their school as well. But to start us off with a bit of summary of the teaching assistants research. So if you're familiar with evidence for learning in our toolkit, this will look quite familiar to you. At the very top bar, we have the approach summary for teaching assistants. And the tagline here is low impact, high cost based on limited evidence. And important to keep in mind that this is an averages game. So we're talking about the average of the research in this context. We thought it was also important to highlight that teaching assistants play into a number of approaches that fit within the toolkit, more than we've listed here as well, but particularly, and ones you'll hear tonight, individualised instruction, the use of TAs in one-to-one tuition, and of course small group tuition as well. And you'll see there the cost, evidence, security and months of impact for those particular approaches is even stronger than what we see of general approaches for teaching assistants. Something that's really important to keep in mind when we're talking about this research is the variability, and for teaching assistants particularly, the variability that sits underneath the research in our toolkit is quite large. So you'll see the effect sizes on your screen now. The average they're sitting at what we equate to sort of 1 month of impact additional to the months you would expect. We see that there's quite a variation. So Mercer, for example, that study is quite a small study and works particularly with students with learning difficulties, learning disabilities. So that had a really significant impact in that study, and there were about 50 students involved, so again, quite small. If we look to the other end, and in a similar vein, Gray, also the intervention was looking at sort of phonics work with the use of TAs, and so this was a bit comparable. The study size was again quite small, and we saw that there was almost no impact in that particular case. The program itself was successful, but the role of the TA on top of that program of providing additional support didn't make an impact overall. And to provide a little bit of insight into the evidence for learning suite of support around research around teaching assistants, again, at the top, you'll see the headlines from the Teaching and Learning Toolkit. The links are at the bottom if you'd like to go back and explore these as well. In addition to that, with Melbourne Graduate School of Education, my colleague Tanya, who leads the toolkit, has worked on Australasian research summaries. So this is looking particularly at the research around teaching assistants in Australia and New Zealand. Drawing on this work, about 12 months ago, we released a guidance report which looks at concrete recommendations around making best use of teaching assistants, particularly for school leaders, but with implications for teachers and teaching assistants also. The next slide that I want to show you and highlight is the recommendations that draw from this report. The reason why we like to flag this is because you're going to see in the work that Luke and Michelle have done a number of these threads coming through. On the top line, you'll see, and I know the text is quite small, but please feel free to dive into the guidance report through the link below. There's three main categories that we're looking at. The effective use of TAs under everyday classroom conditions, so what is inside of the classroom. The use of TAs in delivering structured interventions outside of class. And then thirdly is really about that integration of relationships, so integrating what happens between where the teacher is and what's happening in the classroom and the TA. So there's a couple of things here, but really one of these recommendations, recommendations 2, is what underpins a lot of this work. And that is to always think about TAs as a value add to what teachers do, but not to see them as a replacement. So we'll talk about the implications of a few of these things when we get to our panel as well, but encourage you to dive into this. Before we move on from the guidance report and the summary of recommendations, just one common misconception that we get about the guidance report is that this is for TAs and people should give it to their TAs to improve student performance or the impact on student. And what this actually looks at is the leadership decisions and deployment decisions that is made by leadership, and then how teachers are trained as well to interact and build those really positive relationships with teaching assistants. You'll hear tonight that there's benefit beyond just student impact, but that teachers have seen strong benefits when they work closely with teaching assistants in their settings as well. So I'm going to now introduce you to my colleague, Tanya Vaughan. Many of you will be familiar with Tanya, particularly if you've been to our webinars in the past. Tanya leads the Teaching and Learning Toolkit work and does a lot of the mobilisation around sharing evidence into ways that can be integrated into practice, and has done so for a number of years as the Associate Director at Evidence for Learning. I'm going to hand over to Tanya. I'm going to jump into the chat box and help to answer some questions. So please feel free to send them through. And Tanya is going to introduce and facilitate our panel tonight. So Tanya, over to you.
Great, thanks so much, Susanna. Fantastic to see all that evidence from the toolkit and also from the guidance report as well. But most excitedly tonight is that I have the pleasure of introducing our panelists, Luke Willsmore and Michelle Taylor from Emmaus Christian School. So fantastic to have you both here tonight. I'll just read out a brief bio for them first, just to let you know a bit about their background, and then we'll dive into some exciting questions that you have all sent through. And thanks for joining us. It's pretty exciting watching you're all joining us from all over the world tonight and all over Australia. So thanks so much for joining us. All right, so we'll start off with a bit of an introduction to Luke. So Luke is the head of secondary at Emmaus Christian School in Canberra. And he started his teaching career, interestingly, in regional South Australian school. And that really helped Luke to have a passion for engaging students about where they're really at, which we know is crucial to be an excellent teacher. So, and he really engaged with a multidisciplinary approach to this in his teaching to really maximize the interest of the students. So Luke has taught across many different schools, including Mount Stromblum High and Lynham High Schools. Within those, he's had leadership roles. And he also completed a graduate diploma in forensic science, which, Luke, I'd love to pick your brain about once we're offline about that. That sounds like so much fun. So now Luke was really focused in and realized the great benefit of online education and using technology. So with his skills in that area, he was able to really support the teachers and the students as they transitioned to home supported learning during the COVID-19 pandemic remote learning phase in Canberra, which we know is still ongoing in Victoria and ongoing in different parts of the world. So Luke has really enjoyed moving to a non-government school, and particularly Emmaus. He loves the focus on the whole person learning. So with this in mind, Luke has really championed the renewal of the Emmaus Inclusion Support Program and the use of teaching assistants to drive greater engagement of students and to lead to better learning and personal outcomes for all students. So it's with all that professional expertise that we're so delighted to have you joining us here tonight, Luke. So thank you.
Thanks, Dana.
Pleasure. Michelle. Now, Michelle is teacher trained, but always wanted to be, I like Michelle's bio, always wanted to be a photojournalist. So now she combines the best of both worlds. And why wouldn't you? So she's a high school teaching assistant, and she gets to work alongside kids in the classroom by day, while outside of hours, she does restaurant reviews and contributes to an online Canberra newspaper, and also is a photographer, a portrait photographer. Sounds fascinating. She worked in a primary school as a teaching assistant for 12 years. So she brings considerable expertise to this role in her previous school. So in stepping up to that high school environment, she found initially quite daunting, but she soon realised, and I love this, that high school kids just wanted to feel heard and accepted. And all of us that are high school trained would, I think, wholeheartedly agree with that sentiment, Michelle. She says it's a really relational job and that it feels like such a privilege. So she's grateful for her job every day and thankful that she stepped out of her comfort zone. And Michelle says, I love my job. So can you ask for more? Probably not. That's wonderful. So happy to have you here with us, Luke and Michelle. So a bit of an outline, the way we'll be approaching tonight. First, when I ask the questions, I'll be directing them first to Luke and then to Michelle, because Luke will provide an overview of the structure of the leadership and the approach to the changes that they've made at Emmaus over the past 18 months. And then we'll really be hearing from Michelle, what does that actually look like on the ground? How does that translate into everyday practice? And that's why we're so excited that you can join us here today. Great. So, Luke, over the last 18 months, and I know that it's quite exciting for me because I know that it's 18 months because I was there at the very start of the journey when you were at the workshops that we worked up in conjunction with the Association of Independent Schools and the ACT. So I was there day one. So to me, this is like such an exciting journey of evidence. So there have been lots of changes at your school at Emmaus. Can you give us some insight into the community that you and Michelle work in and what those changes have actually looked like?
So thanks, Tanya. So Emmaus is a growing independent Christian school in Canberra, which is a beautifully tight-knit community. But basically, it's been growing steadily over the last few years and transitioned from a school that had previously had one class in each year level to now nearly all the way through having two classes in each year level. And basically, the system we were working with to support students with learning needs wasn't able to cope with that growth very well. So the work that we've done has been previously it was students being withdrawn from class and being LSAs, as they're called previously here, learning support assistants. We're working with them independently outside of the classroom, and it focused very closely on supporting students who had diagnosed learning support needs, which led to the teachers not necessarily having a full understanding or full picture of where those students were at and what support they were receiving in that setting. So basically, after looking at the evidence for learning sort of research, we went about developing a new structure, a new system that focused on helping teachers to own those modifications for the students that needed that, and supporting staff to be able to better meet the needs of students on those ILPs within the class, and changing the leadership structure from one that focused on focusing on students with diagnosed special needs to one that focused on including everyone and providing that support for everyone in the class. And that's what we ended up calling it, was Inclusion Support Program, is the name we ended up giving it. And that program ended up relying quite heavily and utilising TAs much more significantly than we previously had.
Yeah, so that's quite a significant shift, isn't it, to one of really focusing in on inclusion for all students, and quite a shift in the way that teaching assistants actions, I think, are undertaken in that new model, which is really, really exciting. And so, Michelle, you've been a teaching assistant there for the past 12 months. Yep. So can you tell us about the changes that you've seen alongside your colleagues and the students, and just let us know how your work has changed?
Yeah, so I hadn't seen Emmaus under the previous model, but I had worked under a model of withdrawing kids. My fellow TAs, though, who've been here longer than me, they have loved the change, because the way that we do it here at Emmaus, instead of just popping from one class to another, now we have one TA across a whole year group, and that really builds continuity and it builds rapport between the TA and that particular class. And so I actually work mainly with the year 7s. I have 3 maths classes that I do with the year 10 group, and I do a little bit of tutoring here and there, but mainly I'm following the year 7s because they go from class to class. I'm with them, and often it's a case even of when the teaching component is done, I get to go around and do some of the monitoring of the capable students, keeping them on task, answering any of their questions, and that frees up the teacher, who's the expert, to really get alongside the students who might need an extra go through or explanation of a particular, maybe maths is what I always come back to, but a concept that they can see it again, have a couple of extra examples one-on-one. So that's really, I think, brilliant. It does change though. Sometimes I'll be taking the group, the smaller group with the ILP students. It's a real teamship between the TA and the teacher. We get to know the teachers so well. Extra pair of eyes. In high school, they're all using their devices. The teacher's up the front. I'm able to see who may be on the wrong thing on their device. So that kind of thing. Also having an extra pair of eyes and seeing the kids with the continuity. We see what the kids were like in the morning. Was there a little incident that happened that we can inform a teacher about? The next teacher, so this child is going to be a little bit sensitive, go easy on them. So we see how they're progressing. So it's a lot of that emotional, we see the emotional stuff going on, the interplay of friendships, the breakup of friendships, relationships. Yeah, so, and I think I said in my bio, it's a really relational job. There's a lot of building connection, building trust within the kids. I try to really have a connecting point with all the kids in the class, something that we talk about, so that if I've had to pull up a student 5 times in one day because they're using their device in a way they should not be, we've still got that rapport that we can come back to, and there's, yeah, that positive underlying thing.
That sounds wonderful. I love the fact that it's really quite dynamic and it changes independent of the needs of the students. And you were talking then that the teachers sometimes will be working with the students that have the most need, and you'll be working with other students that you want to extend. I love the dynamic nature of it. It's all in line with the research, and that's really exciting, and especially that relational aspect as well, which we know, even, you know, John Hattie has put an effect size to a 0.7. We know that the relationship is so important, and especially in the tumultuous teenage years as the neurons are constantly pruned from their brains.
Having the TA in there all the time allows it to be organic and fluid, so you can have that.
So it really gives you that continuity by you being assigned to a specific year level, and the constant communication too. Thank you so much. Now, Luke and Michelle, but I'll start off with Luke. I know that you've really been informed by the work of the toolkit within this, and when you set out to rethink how best to include all your students and create the best possible learning outcomes for everyone, how did you use evidence to support this change process?
Yeah, well, I think like most people, when you first look at the toolkit, the first thing I jumped to was the effect size and how many months impact each strategy was going to take and what the cost was going to be. And we pretty quickly realised, as sort of indicated in the slides to start with, that TAs by themselves are quite expensive and not necessarily have a huge impact on the learning of the students. So I sort of looked at, okay, well, what else could a TA be utilised to support in the classroom? And then when you start involving some of the other areas, individual instruction, one-on-one tuition, small group tuition, and utilising the TAs in a way that allows the teacher or the TA as well to incorporate those areas of change into the class, then your effect size suddenly goes through the roof, and you're getting a really good value out of having that extra TA in the class. So I guess the toolkit gave us a really good starting point to use to help share what the research said in that very beautiful overview front page, which has it quite clearly labelled for staff, and then the ability to dig into the research behind that as well and actually have a look at the individual studies. It just pulls all those different research papers together in a very user-friendly way. So it made presenting that research to the rest of the leadership team here at Emmaus and eventually the broader staff as well, very easy and very accessible for everyone.
That's fantastic to hear, because that's the whole purpose of it. So that's great. Thank you for sharing that. And what about for you, Michelle? Can you see how that research has informed what is happening actually on the ground level? And you spoke about some of that already, but
yeah, I mean, when Luke was showing us some of the toolkit, it is super clear to see how we are using all of that, and how it has, I think it's just become how we live and breathe in the school. It's just so natural. So it's fitted really well with how we are as a school. Yeah.
Fantastic. Great, thank you. And so one of the things that you've both found is that, particularly in your junior classes, so teachers have been reporting that there has been a reduction in behavioural incidences. So behaviour has been improving over time due to the presence of a teaching assistant within that classroom. What do you think are the key actions that teaching assistants have undertaken that has led to that improved behaviour? And I'll start with you, Luke, and then turn to you, Michelle, for the on-the-ground detail.
I think some of the feedback we've had from the primary staff, obviously we're a K-10 school here, was that having that second adult in the room allowed them to feel more supported in being able to spend the time to address a behaviour concern with a student, or to work through it more thoroughly with a student, and still having someone else in the room to answer the questions and keep things rolling along. So for the primary teachers, they just felt that really gave them the ability to spend the time addressing a behaviour concern with a student. One of the other things is just the collaborative nature of having a second adult in the room, and that covers across the whole school, in that ideas, being able to bounce ideas off each other, that support of another adult present has really, I think helped teachers have that confidence to take on some of the other things that are happening in the room, to be able to provide that bit deeper level of support for the students who might be struggling or looking for some guidance. And I think probably one of the other things I've personally experienced with TAs in the room is the ability to de-escalate with two different people. So if you've gone into a bit of a conflict with a student who's not been doing the right thing, and the student's got their back up with you a little bit, it's great to have someone else to be able to come in alongside them after that conflict and be the person to redirect them to their work, rather than you having to go straight back in and go, well, now you've got to do the work. That de-escalation ability of having two adults in the room has been invaluable for me personally in the new system.
That's super helpful. I like there was a lot in there, because it's really, you're talking about increased engagement at one level to decrease behaviour, which we know exists within the literature. And you're also talking about having two people playing on the same team, and that awkwardness that comes after, trying to have students come back on task. And if you're the teacher and you're asking, and then if a TA can follow in and just say, look, no, this is where your attention needs to be, rather than you again, and then you're back on the class. That would be so helpful. I think I would have loved that as a teacher. And Michelle, what about for you at the ground level? How do you think that plays out for you? What have you seen?
Yeah, look, I think what Luke said, I so agree with what he said about the de-escalating. I think that's really important. And there's that de-escalating of maybe tension, but there can also be de-escalating of you can tell if somebody looks like they're close to tears, or they might be behaving poorly, and they're not the child that maybe always does that. So there's something else going on, and you can quickly just come aside. Often we'll have somebody sitting outside having a little chat for 2 minutes, just saying what's going on. Then go to the bathroom, have a drink of water, and it's another way of de-escalating, but it's not the anger, not the tension, but also other emotions that are going on. I think that's probably the main one I can think of when it comes to coming alongside kids with behavior.
Yeah, that would be so helpful.
Behavior too. You can see something starting, two kids having a chat, maybe about to, and just remind them. That kind of thing, maybe. I think
Cheryl touched on it earlier too, but that ability in secondary to bring that information of what's happened in the class before, to have that TA that's going between classes when you've got multiple teachers that don't know what's happened the lesson before, but being able to bring that information and share that information with the next teacher, that was kind of also part of our design to build that inclusion support team with the TAs and the teachers all in that sort of team, was to be able to share that information more thoroughly around how to support kids in that social emotional space, but also when it comes to modifications in ILPs and that sort of thing that work really well, being able to share that through with everyone.
And then we share, CC Luke in, CC the school counsellor in, to something that looks like it's an ongoing thing. So everybody's up to speed, and then we can work something out together. Talk to that kid, and that's another way of de-escalating, getting on top of it quickly.
Yeah, and really that open communication, because I know myself when I was a secondary teacher, being in charge of 120 students, trying to constantly maintain, what are their exact needs and catering to that needs is very challenging if you haven't got the support of a teaching assistant. So I can see that coming through, and you're talking both at the cognitive level and also at the emotional regulation level. And if we can, I guess it's a lot of it's preventative, isn't it? So that, how can we make sure that this doesn't become a big thing, because it's just so easy in those teenage years. So I'm a parent of a teenager. In those teenage years, for escalation to occur. But thankfully, I have a teaching assistant as a husband, so he de-escalates. We sort of do a bit of tag teaming at home, but it is a bit, we are doing home supported learning, so it's not dissimilar. Who's going to put him back on task? Who's looking after the emotions? But just one. Yeah, but really useful to hear that. And I like the way it's operating at those two levels, both the academic and the emotional support. And we know that it's been such a tricky, it continues to be such a difficult year. We're in a global pandemic. So if we can support our kids emotionally as well through this, what a fantastic mechanism and supportive way to do that. So we know that you've got quite a few students that require individual learning plans who have modifications within that. So can you talk to us about the partnership, and you have touched a little bit upon that already, between the teaching assistants and the teachers in supporting those individual students with modifications?
Yeah, so I think coming back to the initial sort of design was that the TAs were there to support the whole class and free up the teacher to focus on where the need was, be it extension for some, be it support for those with implementing some of those specific modifications that are needed within ILPs. But that's helped really lead to an ownership from the teachers in owning those ILPs and the modifications that needed to be made. I think one of the big fears teachers had to start off with was around differentiation and the concept that they were going to have to deliver, multiple different lessons in the same class and how they were going to do that and all that sort of concern. And I think TAs supporting teachers has really helped, really seen a great improvement in that differentiation because they can effectively take a bunch of different groups or classes within a class and that's seen that become much stronger than it was previously. Specifically around the development of the ILPs, the TAs, like we've already shared, that information sharing, the TAs have been able to assist in, we saw this work really well in maths and now in science. Why don't you have, like some of those suggestions and helping teachers with the development of those ILPs and the assessment of how those ILPs are actually running and going, I think has, really supported staff in that space, and that was sort of what we were hoping to do.
That's great. I love to hear of the sharing between departments because that can be quite challenging at the high school level not to have silos because of the distinct nature of subjects. But I know you've always taken a multidisciplinary approach, so maybe your leadership has reflected that as well. But great to hear that the TAs are sort of acting as the glue between the subjects in some ways by sharing that knowledge that they know of the individualised learning plans from one teacher to the next. And the teachers are sharing that as well. So from maths to science, that's fantastic. And what about for you, Michelle? How does that play out on the ground in terms of helping and supporting the students with their differentiation and also with the individualised modifications?
Yeah. So I think when it comes to the individualized modifications, the teacher's the expert, but we can have a little bit of that intuitive. We're seeing them, seeing what they are capable of. I think an example I was thinking of is one of our students in year 7. He is pretty much nonverbal in class. He chooses not to participate. He just has a lack of self-esteem. He doesn't want to speak up. And so I have to help him with literacy. And he was gauged coming into our school at a year 3 level as a year 7 student, and did not want to read the childish books that I was, having to provide him with. But we found through conversations that he has real fascination with the underlying narrative of Trump, and he finds Trump hilarious, and he just loves everything, all the information he can get about him. So because it's election time, there's a lot of comprehension stuff online. So I was able to find some things, and I tell you what, he was reading, I think, at about a year 5 level, and answering all the questions really well. He was very conversational. So it was that, in that case, he was finding something that really sparked his passion. And it was just a matter of him joking with it about with me quite a lot that had that. I thought, oh, I wonder if. So I guess that's that continuity and knowing the kids really does help us. And we know that the teacher is the expert with sorting out all that material, but we're working alongside and giving them some of the ground stuff that we're picking up.
Yeah, and that's really you're talking really in depth there about relational information that can only come, after lots of conversations with an individual student. That as a teacher, if you have 120 students, that's just not possible. So if the TA can draw on that relational content and then use that to engage students in their learning, and extend them through American politics, which are fascinating, why not? That's fantastic. And I think that's one of the keys, isn't it, is that aspect of knowing your students, and a TA can really assist in that. And I also like the way, and I didn't really talk about that so much, was that the focus in on really the fact that you can differentiate to a much higher level if you have a TA support, because they can be working with the groups at the time. It's not quite as daunting and overwhelming. And then the individualized learning plans as well on top of that, if you've got that additional support. And that's really exciting, because we all want, and that story you provided there was, we all want every student to do as well as possible. That's why we got into this profession. So if we can assist that with the really thoughtful use of teaching assistants, that's amazing. Yeah. Anyway, I'm getting all emotional, but it is amazing. That's great. I mean, individual student progress. And I think that's the joy of the job. Sorry, I was speaking to my husband today. It is very joyful about the job of the TA. It's seeing, you really get to see that growth a little bit closer than the teacher does, I think, sometimes with the individual students. And I think that's the joy of that profession. And maybe we don't talk about that enough, and we need to. There's an aside. But it's just so true. So like many other schools, moving to a more, a sadder topic, but still on a related course of improving students' learning. So like all schools, no, not all schools, but most schools across Australia have experienced some period of home-supported learning. Emmaus moved to home-supported learning. How did you particularly approach the roles of the teaching assistant, and how did you use them within that time? And I'll start up to ensure the success of all your students. And I'll start off with you, Luke, and then again to you, Michelle.
Yeah, so obviously during home-supported learning or lockdown, whatever you want to call it, in different states, but we had two different streams of TAs working in different areas. So obviously, we still had quite a few students on site, kids of essential workers, and some of those students with somewhat more significant learning needs. So for the on-site, the TAs were able to be that common point of connection for those kids, and created a real stability, particularly for some of those students who were not coping well with the change and the craziness that we were all facing in that time. And the other component we utilised was, obviously, we went to Google Classroom and Google Meets for our online learning. And we had the TAs operating in that space as well to continue to deliver that support to the class holistically in the online space. And I think having the two different streams actually, we got really good feedback from a bunch of the parents and students that support being able to continue into online learning was really, really positive.
Yeah, so that's really talking about, and it's the same, I think it's the same here in Victoria as well. We've got the essential kids that are face-to-face, so the TAs will come in and support them, and then there's a support team running online as well. And no doubt with the schedule, some were probably scheduled sometimes face-to-face, sometimes online, just so that everyone got a shot of coming into the workplace and then equally being at home. And Michelle, how was your experience of that time? What actions did you find you were undertaking that you felt really supported the students in that really tough time?
was like a buffet of actions.
every second of every day in a school is a buffet of actions. I love that. It is so true. It's like, there's this happening. No, there's this happening. No, there's this happening.
So it was actually a real privilege because it was a smaller group, but it was across from about year 4 to year 10. We had a couple of students, here and there in that group. So they were actually some of them were very distracted because they weren't just with their whole class all doing the same things. Different kids were doing different things. So one of our roles was to keep them on task, to make sure they were online when they were supposed to be online and doing their other stuff while they were supposed to be doing, their handwriting or whatever. We had some students who were at home, so we had who were on ILP. Some of their younger students needed to keep up their literacy and maths tutoring. So that was kind of a learning thing for me, learning how to do that online. It was a bit daunting. I think the most daunting thing was having the parents in the room. So, but we'd be tutoring, I'd be tutoring them with screenshots of whatever they were to be learning how to share screens. They were very quick, they're much quicker than me, learning how to share screens and even play a game at the end. We worked all that out with literacy and math stuff with those kids. And also we still managed to be consistent. So for myself, my own experience, for the core subjects, I would go into the classroom, the online classroom for the teaching bit. So I was always there. I'd be listening to what they were learning. And as soon as the online or the teaching component was done, I'd rush over to my help desk, which was a breakout Google Meets. And if any students needed to have something explained, they'd pop into my Google Meets. And sometimes there'd be 7, 8, 10 kids working quietly, but if they needed something, they'd share their screen, and then I would, show them on Paint or something like that. And so we all kind of would work together in there, and the kids really enjoyed that. So that was a practical side. And I guess the last one was we had a role as being a bit of a cheerleader. We had a couple of those students who just found it really tricky to adapt to online learning. A lot of the kids loved having their faces there, eating their favorite food while they were learning. And these couple of kids just found it really tricky and decided not to show up at all sometimes. So with the counselor's suggestion and the parent's suggestion, I'd pop over and have a little meeting with them and be a bit of a cheerleader and say, you've got this, where are you up to with this? You can do it. You don't have to show your face. You can be on there. You can be watching, but you don't have to show your face. You can be on mute, but we want you to be part of the team still. We want you to be part of our class. So I guess that kind of thing with the continuity and yeah, just being a cheerleader, because it was a tough time for our kids.
Look, it is. And everyone, I think, every kid is across Australia and in Victoria at the moment, everyone will respond differently to those circumstances. And what I'm hearing there, from the smorgasbord, is that there are lots of different actions that you were taking, and they were dependent on the student's needs at the time. So if a student needed an emotional, check-in just to say, how's that one piece of work going? Trying to get them back on task, pushing them a little bit. You were there for that. Then you were there for like whole class support, and then also there on site as well. So yeah, it was a very dynamic time. And I know that the role that leaders and teachers and teaching assistants have played in this time has been absolutely phenomenal. To think that we moved to online in the space of, it was 3 weeks in Victoria. I'm not sure what was the period of time in Canberra. I think it was similar.
Yeah, we moved pretty quickly, and we were very blessed to have quite a number of TAs already working with us, and that created that ability to move so much faster and still have the staff feeling supported and able to focus on delivering the online content, and keeping all the different platforms that we had up and going was the TAs were invaluable to us in that time in particular.
Yeah, that's what I think too. They've played and they continue to play a really important role in response to the global pandemic. They're always important, I think, every day, but in troubled times, more hands on deck and hands that know what they're doing, and plus hands that you can deploy thoughtfully, that's just going to help every student wherever they're at, and every student will respond differently. And so I have one final question for you, Luke. So what do you think is the most critical aspect of the teaching assistant's role at Emmaus when thinking about the impact that they have on both students and teachers? Just a small question.
Yeah. Look, I think for us, the partnership between the TAs and the teachers has been really encouraging to see and really critical to the success of the model. The TAs are just part of the team. They're part of the whole school, and I think that's built into it all working really well. We've got an amazing team of TAs, and they do an amazing job, go well above and beyond what's asked of them. So I think allowing the TAs, like you mentioned yourself, to share in that reward of seeing students succeed, you see the joy that they're sharing in when they see the steps that the students are moving along in the right direction. And I think that's key to what teachers find as a really rewarding part of their job. And I think the structure we've moved to has allowed the TAs to really share in that as well. And that's built that community feel and really strengthened that partnership feel in developing everything that goes on.
So, and it would really, I guess as well, that if the TAs are seeing the improvement in students' learning and teachers are as well, we know that builds collective efficacy. We know how much of an impact that has on our students' learning is just, the sheer belief that we think that our students can learn. All our students can learn, even the boy that came with the grade 3 level is now up to grade 6. Everyone can learn and move. And when you see that progress, that's really what we got into education for, is seeing that. So what we have got a bit of spare time, which is great. So what I might do is I'm going to invite Susanna on screen as well. Okay, great. She's given me a question, so I can just read that question out. All right, perfect. All right, so this is just spontaneous question, just throwing that out there. So how do you think that the parental community surrounding Emmaus have responded in the way that you're using, the change in the way that you're using teaching assistants across the school?
I think because the use of teaching assistants has come as part of a broader change. I think it's been, widely received well. We sort of haven't got to the stage of collecting that evidence really thoroughly yet. We've got surveys going out later in the year that use to gather that sort of direct feedback, but certainly the anecdotal feedback has been really positive, and particularly during the COVID time, parents suddenly realised just exactly what the TAs were doing and the role that they were able to play in that time. It became very visible to the broader school community, the work the TAs have been doing. So I think, very positively, but haven't got the hard
data yet. That's all right. Well, I'm just thinking about my own experience and what that's been like in home-supported learning. I've always appreciated primary teachers, probably because I'm secondary trained, and it's frightening. But now, having played that role, I'm like, you guys are superheroes. I'm really doing this with a full classroom. So having the parents engaged and then having that additional support from the teaching assistants is really, really beneficial and really helpful. Just checking if we have any other questions coming in.
Tanya, there was some really great questions coming in from the chat box. I might read one of them out.
Perfect. Go for it.
If you've got questions, you drop them in the chat box. There was one that was really focused on how teachers made the transition to working more closely in the classroom with students of all abilities and managing those modifications. Did you find that those teachers needed a lot of support in how that role changed? Because the roles changed quite quickly.
Yeah, look, there was definitely a bit of nervousness around it, and I think in the changing of the roles and getting the teachers to own those modifications more thoroughly themselves, the use of TAs to support that was kind of the give and the take there, in that we're expecting teachers to step up and take on something they previously hadn't done a huge amount of, that had supported in other ways with that. So the TAs and upping the number of TAs and the amount of TA time that staff had was widely appreciated. But there was definitely some nervousness early on. I think, Michelle, you mentioned about how teachers initially didn't quite know how to operate with a TA. So we had to sort of work with teachers a little bit, and the TAs were great in actually, okay, well, working together and building that teamwork up was really invaluable, because it wasn't something that was didn't happen straight away. It was something we had to sort of work on a little bit.
Yeah, I know, because at the end of last year, because the year sevens this year were going to have new teachers, and I remember one teacher just kept saying to me, "You're going to do this, are you? You're going to help me in this way, are you? How am I going to use you?" So she was very nervous, and it's beautiful. It's worked out very organically and just unfolded lovely. But she was used to the old model, but yeah, she's really stepped up, and we work together as a great team. So.
Something else that's popping up in the chat box is around the prioritization of resources in particular. And Luke, this is probably a question for you to answer. We know that this is an expensive exercise, and something that you have made as a school and as a leadership team a very deliberate decision to invest in this way because you believe in it. What has to give for you to be able to do that?
I think we're going through an amazing period of growth. So for us, that's brought with it the ability to make these sort of changes. Obviously, it wouldn't be something you could just roll out like that just anywhere. But for us, that growth in the extra student numbers that we've had, and the diversity of needs that we've had to meet from from the growing number of students. Obviously, in CCD funding and providing support for individuals has helped contribute, but it is definitely an expensive exercise. There's no two ways about it. And then the toolkit certainly is correct in that. But I think by combining the TAs, like I mentioned before, to assist in teachers delivering a bunch of different approaches, it really brings that value back into the investment that having the higher number of TAs requires.
Fantastic. I'm thinking we'll wrap it up there. Do you think? I think probably haven't got time for another question. I think we're pushing it. But I can't thank you both enough. I'll thank you again at the very, very end, but I'll thank you now, especially for spontaneous on-the-spot questioning then as well. But thank you for all your expertise that you've brought tonight, and just the journey of the story at Emmaus and all the changes that you've made, really in partnership with the whole school, which is just so exciting. And so I'll just do a wrap up and a goodbye now. So this is where we're heading our next. So as Susanna said at the start, this is our second last webinar for the year. I think it's our 10th. It'll be our 10th next, which is quite a lot. But we've enjoyed every single one of them, and we thank you all for coming tonight. So next one will be on improving student behaviour, and we'll be lining up some additional speakers. similar to the format that we've conducted in the past and here tonight as well. This is the different ways that you can connect to us. Also, to let you know, we'll automatically send out a certificate of attendance to all of you that have come along tonight. That will automatically come from our Info at Evidence for Learning account. We'll also send you a survey, so let us know, as we said in the other slide as well, let us know what you'd like to hear from us for next year as well. We're finishing off in October because we think that that's fair to the profession, because we all know what it's like. We're all, Susanna and I and Pauline are all teachers. We have experienced report time, and we didn't think you'd like webinars during report time. We didn't think that was a winning combination. So we're on all the socials, Evidence for Learning is, and we're on there as professionally as well on Twitter. And please follow us, and if you want to subscribe to our e-newsletter as well to find out any up and coming news. We've also got our Evidence Informed Educated Network. And we're ending a little bit early, which I think is okay because you're all so busy. I just wanted to really, again, just reiterate how grateful I am to Luke and Michelle for their time. We also wrote a piece together on the changes that Luke has led at Emmaus, a teacher magazine. Also, at the end of this, we'll send out a resource pack which answers all the individual questions that were sent in and has backup resources as well for everything. So thanks so much for taking an hour out of your incredibly busy schedules, whether you're a teaching assistant, whether you're a teacher, or whether you're a school leader. And we hope that this has been helpful for you, and yeah, look forward to joining you for one last time for this year. And for Luke and Michelle, all the best for the rest of the school year, and no doubt we'll be in contact before then. Thank you very much.